Okay, in today's video we're gonna talk about the frame buffer in V-Ray. And it's the same as Corona frame buffer, except for a few small differences. On the whole, they're very much alike, so even if you're working in V-Ray all the time, it won't hurt to see my video on Corona's frame buffer. And I'm sure you'll learn a couple of new things from there. In this video, we'll do an overview of the tools that we're gonna use later on. And I decided to talk about V-Ray's frame buffer early into the course. Don't worry if you don't understand everything off the bat. We'll be revisiting the frame buffer during practical lessons. Okay, let's get started. So you need to have V-Ray installed on your device, and I'm using V-Ray 6. To activate V-Ray, you go to Render Setup window and select V-Ray as our current renderer. To open the Render Setup window, press F10 on your keyboard, or click this teapot icon. Frame buffer is a window in which rendering process takes place. To open the frame buffer, we go to the V-Ray tab and frame buffer and unfold its settings. Next, we click Show Last VFB. Here's our frame buffer window. And now let's see what tools we've got. Some tools are barely used, so I'm gonna skip them. For now, let's focus on the tools that are really useful. Okay, so here is where rendering takes place. Here we have render channels or render elements, and you can add new elements in the render settings. So we're going to be doing this when getting ready for the final render. As for now, we'll only touch upon it lightly. So the image can be split in different channels, such as reflections, refractions, shadows, grid color, and so on. There are also various masks that we need for post-editing in Photoshop. We can find all these channels in this drop-down list. There are color filters, but they are very rarely used. So to save the current render, you need to click Save Current Channel and pick the format that is right for you. So for example, JPEG or PNG. If we click this, we'll see extra settings. For example, we can save all image channels to separate files. And that's particularly convenient when we're using a large number of render elements. Next, we have an option called Follow the Mouse. And if you enable this option, during rendering, your computer will be using the maximum of its capacities to render the area around the mouse pointer. Now let's see how that works. Let's stop interactive, restart it, wait for the scene to load. Okay, and then we turn on this option and hover the pointer. See this area around the pointer? It's rendering in high quality. The noise is being removed faster than usual, and that comes in very handy when we're working with materials and doing fine adjustments. It also helps to see subtle shadows and small details and things like that. So moving on. We can use this next setting while the interactive render is on, but nevertheless, here we can select the render quality percentage. Now, I wouldn't change anything here, but if you want your interactive render to have better quality, you can go for 110% or 75%. Or it can be 10%, whatever you want. Next tool is region selection, and it works the same just like in Corona. And we're going to use it all the time. Select a certain area in the render. And when we start interactive, or the final render, it's only this specific area that's rendering. It's a great tool for working with objects, setting up materials, and shadows. And we'll be revisiting it during our practical lessons for sure. Now, unlike Corona, here you can resize the frame like this, and even drag it by its center. If you're a Corona user, it's gonna feel a bit strange at first, but you'll get used to it pretty quickly, I'm sure. Next, we have a debug mode, and we don't use it very often. So by clicking this corner, you can select various display modes of your frame buffer. For example, you can display texture coordinates, or normals, or wireframe, or ambient occlusion. That's occlusion shadows. So it's best to stick with lighting, I would say. So here we can select the camera that we want to use for rendering. In this scene, we only have one camera, but if you have another camera in your scene, you can switch to that too. Here I switched to the other camera. Now let's go back. Anyway, it's good to know that you can switch between cameras right in the frame buffer. Next, we have stop button that serves to stop render. Here we have the button that starts interactive and the button for the final render. So these are two different teapots. Here we can select the camera for interactive render. It's nice to have this option as well. Now let's explore Layers tab. Layers tab serves to do post editing. And just like in Photoshop, V-Ray's post editing tools are more extended than Corona's. So for instance, we can click this plus icon and pick a layer to apply on top of our render for post correction. Now the most important layer is probably exposure. If our render is dark, we can raise the exposure to make our image look brighter, or we can lower the exposure. Highlight burn is another useful tool. It tones down highlighted windows or other highlighted spots. So to tone down highlights, we need to lower the highlight burn value. It's very much like highlight compression tool in Corona. And also we can adjust contrast. We can either change the amount or use a slider. So let's adjust the exposure and contrast a little bit, for example. Also, we can edit our image through curves. By moving the Bezier curve, we can make our image more contrasting. Another way to do this is to add contrast layer and set its multiplier to 2 or 3. Also, we can select blending mode. It's very similar to blending modes in Photoshop. We can choose overlay, or we can choose hard light, divide, and so on. If you want to see all the layers that we've applied, you need to expand this list. And keep in mind that the modifier list may occasionally freeze. Here are all the effects that we've applied to our image. You can disable any of them. It works just like correction layers in Photoshop. Let's adjust exposure and display correction layer to make our image a bit brighter. Alright, so this way you can add and adjust various effects. or you can add effects after the final render. So that's very useful. Okay, moving on. The next tab is Stats. It has more parameters compared to Corona. Here we can see stats on GI, RAM, and so on. So that's very important stats right there. Total RAM is 64 gigs, 7 gigs is being used for rendering. Total free RAM is 35. So it's good to know these numbers when you work with heavy scenes. There's also timing. In other words, here you can find any information you need. So personally, I think it's mostly for geeks who love comparing stats between scenes. So I'm not gonna linger on this. And finally, a tab called Log. It shows errors and things like that. In Corona, this information is displayed in a separate window. In V-Ray, there's dedicated tab, which is very convenient. Now, let's see the History tab. It's very much like in Corona, except for some minor differences. Here's one difference. When we hover the pointer over the image, we see resolution and render time. And it's good to know this information, but it's not enabled by default like in Corona. So in V-Ray, you need to turn it on manually. To do that, you go to Options, go to VFB Settings, and then go to History tab and check Enable. And then you choose how much space the history will take up on the disk. And we might also need to provide a path to the folder where our files will be stored. And that's pretty much it. The rest of the settings are rather basic, so let's just skip that. So once again, make sure to turn on history and choose the maximum size. Also, you can choose the way your files will be saved. If you enable autosave and autosave layers, the layers will be saved automatically, or you can save them manually. Now let's go for the autosave mode for now. And now let's see how we can compare different renders. So we click this plus button here, and our current layer, our current piece of history, is saved to the History tab. Another way to compare image A and image B is through A/B testing. To activate this tool, click A/B horizontal. And we click 1/2 a render A, and the right button, click 1/2 a render B. Actually, this is how we do it in Corona. In V-Ray, you use the same button. Now by moving the slider, we can compare the two renders and see how they are different. Which parts turned out better in render A and which ones are better in render B. In V-Ray, unlike in Corona, we can also compare renders in the vertical format. To compare more than two render versions, you go to A, B, C, D layout. But that's too advanced actually, so usually 2 versions is enough. So with this button we can remove the images that we no longer need, and that's it on V-Ray's frame buffer. Actually, there's one more thing. Let me just say that in the View menu we can enable or disable Show History. Same for layers. You can turn them on or off. Just like that. Okay, that's it for this lesson. Hopefully all of this made sense, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. So hello everyone. Today we're launching a new series of videos on light sources. And in this video we're going to start with Corona Sun. Here I have a scene, and it's a scene with a living room. You can use this scene as well, and I'll link it down in the description below, or you can pick up your own. So make sure your room has windows, because that's really important in this case. Okay, so let's create Corona Sun. For that, we'll click Create. It's this plus icon here, and then click Light Sources. Then select Corona from the list and click Corona Sun. Next, we draw a line from our sun to set direction of sunlight. And this light source will be emanating our sun. Before we process to setting up our sun, we first need to add and set up a camera inside the interior. Let's add a standard camera. We're not gonna overcomplicate things with Corona camera and its exposure settings. A standard target camera will do just fine. So let's place it here. It should be looking through the doorway. So we select 15mm lenses for that. We switch to camera view. The camera's showing us the living room as seen through the doorway. And now let's move in closer to get a better view. Now we need to lock our interactive to this camera so that when we switch between our viewports, the render won't update. Okay, here's our sun. It's shining through the windows. In this video, we won't be fine-tuning lighting. We'll just focus on the basic settings of Corona Sun. So let's start interactive render in the scene tab, and we click Start Interactive. In the frame buffer, we can see what our scene looks like at the moment. And let's assign one and the same material to this whole scene. This will help us avoid any visual distractions. So now we go to the Scene tab and turn on MTL Override. Next we click None and select Corona Physical MTL. And that's it. Now you may have a situation where when sunlight is not coming through the windows because of the glass. So go to perspective view and make sure your windows don't have glass. Now we don't need it at this point. Sunlight must be coming through the windows. And once again, we're not going to set up lighting in this video. Our goal for today is to set up Corona Sun. So let's see how the position of our sun affects lighting in the room. If we lower our sun, it starts emitting a more orangey sort of light. This image is way too blurred right now, which means we need to turn off denoise. It's on by default. So I recommend you do that in your scene. Go to Performance and uncheck Fast Preview Denoise. Okay, once again, if we lower the sun, its light becomes duller and more orangey. And it also works the other way around. If we raise the sun high, its light becomes colder and brighter, and the curtains are in our way, so let's remove them to let more light into our living room. So we'll remove curtains here and there. As you can see, the light is too bright. There are highlighted spots on the floor. Let's lower our sun a little bit so that our room gets more light. You see we have highlights here. Keeping the right mouse button pressed, we point the cursor at this area and see that all the RGB values are close to 1. But that's not right. We need to adjust our sun's brightness. But that's very easy. We select our sun and go to the Modify tab. And let's tweak some parameters. Now let's start with intensity. We'll lower intensity by 10 times to 0.1. The sun becomes less bright. And size is at 1. We increase it to 10, and the sunspots become somewhat softer, smoother. In real life, if the sun's hiding behind the clouds or mist, its light becomes diffused or scattered. So the thicker the clouds, the greater the diffusion gets. It's the greatest diffusion effect that we can achieve. We're going to need this parameter in the future to set up a beautiful, realistic lighting. Now let's change the sun size to 32. And this way we get ourselves these beautiful blurry sunspots on the floor. Let's move on. In both Corona and Vray, there's this shadowing from clouds option. We don't need this setting for the purposes of this lesson, so let's just leave it as it is. Next is color. It's a very important setting. If we select the realistic mode, the sun behaves like this. When it's low in the sky, its light becomes warmer and more orangey. And when it's high in the sky, its light is cold. But seeing that 3D artists aim for a cleaner, a softer kind of light. So I recommend using the direct input mode and opt for cold, neutral white light. It's a great way to imitate subtle overcast lighting. Or you can change the sun color by changing the sun temperature in kelvins. So if, for example, we enter 4,000, we get a warm light. If we change it to 7 or 8,000, the light becomes colder. It's very rare though. It looks like moonlight. Let's enter 8,000. Alright, let's go back to direct input mode and leave the white color. That looks pretty good, but if you want to make the light a bit warmer, you can adjust the sun color manually. Alright, let's move on. The next parameter is visibility. To be able to change these options, we first need to make the sun visible in our render. And so let's turn the camera so that we can see the sun through the window. Now here, a part of the sun disk is now visible. If we don't want the sun disk to be visible, we just turn off the visible directly option. Next we have visible in reflections, and you can choose whether or not you want the sun to be reflected in the windows. So I recommend turning it off. If you set up the material right, it can be glass or chrome. Reflections will appear anyway. Next, visible in refractions. It's the sunlight that we see coming through transparent objects, like those made of glass. So if we assign a glass material to our window, we would see sunlight, but since there's no glass, we can't see it. Now, of course, visible directly and visible in refractions are slightly different settings. If we had glass, we would see the sun shining through it. Okay, next we have generates caustics. It's a caustic effect created by glass and chrome objects. So we can skip this setting as well. We can turn off all 4 of these options. They're not crucial for setting up our light source. I reinstalled the camera in its original position. Now what else we have here? We have include and exclude parameters. We use them when we want to do a little trick. We might need to exclude an object out of sunlight, or on the contrary, included into sunlight. So let's take this lamp, for example. So let's select that. And suppose we don't want it illuminated by the sun. So let's exclude it from sunlight. So we click sun, and next we click this plus icon, and then click the lamp. See? The lamp is no longer illuminated by the sun. And if we click this big button here, there comes a list of objects. And we can pick any of these and either include or exclude them from being affected by sunlight. Now pay attention that we switch from exclude to include and click OK. See? The lamp is now the only illuminated object in the room. Now, if there's an object in your scene that for some reason is not illuminated by the sun, you need to adjust, include, and extrude parameters. So let's reset the settings to go back to our original scene. Alright, and so also we have add Corona sky environment. And this setting serves to add Corona sky, and we'll talk about this in the next video. Okay, today's topic is V-Ray sun. So we have this living room, and I'll link it down in the description. You can use it as an example if you want, or you can take a different scene. It doesn't make any difference at this point. So let's see how V-Ray sun actually works. And I also have a video like this for Corona sun, by the way, if you're interested. Okay, so let's go ahead and click create, go to light sources, and here we can select V-Ray from the list. Here we have V-Ray light, V-Ray IES, V-Ray sun, and others. So we select V-Ray sun. And what we do then is we direct the sunlight inside the room and to the corner. There's a prompt message asking me if I want to add a V-Ray sky. So that's fill light. So I'll click no for now because this video is dedicated solely to V-Ray sun. Okay, so we've directed our sun inside the interior, and now let's adjust its position. We turn off the grid and raise our sun. Make it shine directly into the corner of the room. And then we'll create a V-Ray camera that we'll be using for our interactive render. So we'll go to create, go to cameras, select V-Ray, physical camera. And let's put it here so that it looks inside the room through the doorway like this. Also, let's make it a bit wider, and let's increase film gate parameter, or we can check field of view box and increase this parameter instead. This will do either way. Then I'll press C to switch to camera view. Let's move in closer. Good. Now we'll start interactive render. I'll press F10 to open the render setup window. We switch from Arnold to V-Ray. And then we need to paint our interior the same color. So we don't want any distractions in the form of different materials. That's why we need to turn on override option. It works the same way as in Corona. In V-Ray tab, we find global switches. Here we check the MTL.override box. And then we click no matte right here. And select V-Ray MTL. And then we scroll up and find our frame buffer. As you can see, there's many settings here, many buttons, but don't get scared. Just do what I say. We click Show Last VFB. And here's our frame buffer window. And now we can finally start our interactive render. So we click this little teapot icon, and we've already worked with frame buffer in the previous lessons. Nothing is happening. That's because we haven't set up the light. And here is another thing. We have glassed windows. So we need to remove the glass in order to let the light into the room. So we click MTL override settings and turn on refraction and reflection. We used this scene before in Corona. And now it's easier to just delete the glass. So let's go to another frame buffer window. I will lock this camera view so that the render won't update. And now we need to find the windows. Here they are. We'll switch to clay mode to see if the windows are glassed or not. They're glassed, so let's just select the glass and delete it. Also the curtains. We don't want anything in our way. So we already have some sunlight inside the room. And now let's set up our sun. So it works the same way as in Corona. There might be some differences, but very minor. So as we change the position of the sun, it changes its color, as you can see. It grows less bright and more blurry, more orangey, kind of. As we raise it higher, its brightness increases. Its light grows harsher. Let's put it here. By changing the position of the sun and the sky, we can actually find the best light and shadow scheme. Okay, and so now let's take a look at our sun parameters. So first we have this enabled option. It means that we can turn the sun off or turn it back on. And we also have intensity multiplier, and we can change that too. Then we have size multiplier. It's the size of our sun. It defines how soft the light is. So for example, let's enter 8. And as you can see, the shadows have grown softer and blurrier. Or we can increase it all the way to 32. The sunlight has grown very soft and scattered. All right, moving on. Filter color is now white. And we can change the color and make it reddish or make it more blue. So if, for example, we want to imitate moonlight, we can pick a colder color. But there are other colors as well, other modes. So let's switch to direct. And in the direct mode, we should select color or color manually. So let's increase intensity. Or we can switch to override mode. And in this case, we have this direct override color. Let's change intensity back and stick with a neutral white color. Let's increase intensity to 3. And suppose we want to imitate a soft light coming through the clouds. So let's set size multiplier to 64. We'll put color mode to override. Color's white, and we've got this neutral colored light. So take note that the color no longer changes when we change the position of the sun. So let's move the sun to let more sunlight into the room and direct it onto the opposite wall. The color of the sun hasn't changed. It's still neutral white. And this is how we can create any effect we want. We can try and imitate the light in the reference, for example. All right, so let's move on. Here we have sky parameters. So in graphic engines, the sun and the sky are tied to one another. They're sort of interconnected. So here we can select different sky models, and we can skip this setting for now. We're going to need it when we will set up different lighting schemes in our interior. Then we have ground albedo. This is another sky parameter, so we can skip that too. And then we have this options section, and it's a very interesting thing. So the first option is exclude or include. Now we may need to exclude an object out of sunlight. Let's take this lamp, for example. So I'll select it. I'll group it and call it lamp. Then I'll select the sun and click exclude. In the list of objects, I'll find lamp, add it to the list on the right, and click OK. And the lamp has been excluded from sunlight. No longer illuminated. Casting no shadows. This option allows us to do these little tricks. So if for some reason we don't want a certain object to be illuminated by the sun, we can easily exclude it from sunlight. And we'll delve deeper into this when we'll be talking about fake lights. Next we have visible, invisible options. It's very much like in Corona. So I'm gonna copy the camera and direct it towards the sun. Now let's switch to this new camera view. Now we can see the sun, although sometimes we don't want it to be visible because we can't see the background. So in this case, we can simply check invisible box, and here the sun is no longer visible. The next option is affect diffuse. So all materials and surfaces in our scene have diffuse properties. So when we turn off this option, the light is gone. In some cases though, we might need to turn it off to imitate glares, for example. In that case, we would need two suns. One would be used as the main light source and the other would serve to create glares. In that case, we would need to turn off all of these options except for affect specular, because it creates glares. We don't need any of those atmospheric effects in our scene. This parameter, cast atmospheric shadow, has to do with clouds, so we'll skip that for now. Shadow bias and photon emit radius serve to create caustic effects and things like that, so we'll skip them too. As you can see, setting up V-Ray Sun is no rocket science, so we need to adjust intensity, size, and color. Here in sky parameters, we'll later have our sky settings. And then we have extrude and include and visible and invisible. And that's it. Nothing more. All right, we're going to use these sun settings to set up lighting schemes in later videos. Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about different types of Corona lights. And we'll find out about their uses. Later on, you'll have a chance to apply this theoretical knowledge in various practical scenes. But today, we're going to see only how it all works in a general sense. All right, so here we have our living room, and you can use this one or you can pick any other scene. Doesn't really matter for now. So how do we add Corona light here? I have interactive render running. And then we click create. And then click this bulb icon for different light types. And then we select Corona light. And here are the settings that we're gonna work with. Let's put our light in the center of the room. It's a sphere, and we'll put it here in the center. All right, that's done. And what settings does this light have? As you can see, it's the only light source in this scene. So let's go to the Modify tab, and the first that we see is that we have this on and off option, and we can turn the light on or we can turn it off. The next setting is targeted, and that allows us to point our light in a certain direction. But in this particular case, we can't do it because our light has a spherical shape. It's shining in all directions. So let's uncheck targeted box. Did you notice that the table is levitating in the air, by the way? Well, that's because I removed a rug from under it. But that's fine. So next we have intensity. That's measured in default units. The default value is 50. We can reduce it to, let's say, to 10, or we can increase it to 200, making the light very bright. But here's the thing. When measured in default units, brightness is affected by the size of the light. In this section, for example, we're using a spherical light. Our sphere has the radius of 10 centimeters. Let's reduce the radius to 5 centimeters. As the light becomes smaller in size, it also becomes less bright. And that's why many 3D visualizers prefer to use lumens. Here, in the drop-down list, we'll select lumens. And so what's the difference here? The difference is that brightness measured in lumens is not affected by the size of the light. So we can increase the radius to, say, 15 centimeters. The light has become bigger, but its brightness has remained the same. That's very convenient. And you can use any type of units you want, whether it's default units or lumens. Anyway, let's go back to default units, and let's reduce intensity to 10, the radius to 5. That's not bright enough. Let's make it 100. All right, the next setting is color. It's the same as for Corona Sun, so we can set the temperature in kelvins. To achieve a warmer light, we reduce this parameter to 3 or 4,000. And here we have this orangey kind of light. And to achieve a neutral light, we need to increase the temperature to 6,500. Another way to set the color is the direct input mode. And that allows you to set the color manually. We can pick this shade of orange, for example, or we can set temperature here below. There's also a mode called text map, which allows us to upload different textures. So let's go ahead and try to upload one. We'll go to material editor. We'll pick some colored map and link it to this slot. And you can see this colored illumination now. The texture has been applied to our scene. This mode is barely used in interior visualization though, so let's switch back to kelvins. All right, moving on. Next, we need to pick the shape of our light. The default shape is a sphere, but it's not always the best choice. Sphere is an ideal shape for lights with a standard spherical bulb, such as bra lamps. But the thing is, you might need another shape. Most of the time, visualizers use a rectangle. So it has width and height, and let's make it 20 by 20. So we've got this square light shining downwards. Let's raise it a bit. And now we need to point it. Remember the target option. So let's check the box. And now we can point our rectangle light at other objects, like a spotlight. It's a great way to highlight and emphasize certain spots by using a fake light. And I'm not going to go deep into the subject now. We're going to delve into this in the upcoming lessons. So for now, we're just gonna do a general overview. Okay, so we can change the width and height. And let's increase the height to 50. All right, the next important parameter is directionality. And it's very important. I can't stress enough how important it is. So that shows the direction in which our light is shining. If we set directionality to 0.5, the light will start to shine onto these objects here. And as you can see, it's too bright. So that means we need to reduce intensity. And feel free to use this setting if you need to achieve a directional beam of light. Values vary exponentially from 0 to 0.5. So I wouldn't recommend going over 0.5. In that case, the rays would be almost parallel to one another. So my advice is to stick with 0.4 or 0.3. And this way you will achieve a softer light. We're going to use this setting pretty often. Next, we have an option called emit on both sides. So we check the box and the light starts to shine in both directions. This setting can be very useful. Then we have wireframe. If it's turned on, our light is displayed in viewport as these lines here. If we turn it off, our light is displayed as a square. Next come the settings that we've already seen for Corona Sun. So we turn off visible directly if we don't want our light to be visible. Next, we turn off visible and reflections, visible and refractions, and also generate caustics. There's also an option called occlude other lights. So let's see how it works. Let's add another light by creating a copy. Here's this option, occlude other lights. You can choose whether or not your current light will be blocking out other lights. So I recommend turning it off because otherwise other lights will be generating shadows and we can't see it in the scene, but it's still possible. So it's best to uncheck all of this and other options so that they don't affect our render. Another shape that we can use is a disc. And if you don't want a square light, you can go for a disc. It's a great choice for point lights. Here we have ceiling lights. So let's place our disc there and point it by clicking select light target. Here we've got this directional light. It's got a rather large radius. And as I've said earlier, the bigger the light, the softer the shadows that it generates. Okay, let's delete this light and leave this one. So the radius is currently at 20 centimeters. But we need to imitate a directional beam of light coming out of this point. So we'll switch to lumens so that when we change the radius, the brightness remains the same. We'll reduce the radius to 3 centimeters. The shadows have become very sharp. we've created a point light that is shining in all directions. To make it look more realistic, let's change directionality to 0.5. And now the light is illuminating this spot solely. So now we can point our beam of light wherever we want. So for example, here. And if you feel like the shadows are too sharp, you can change the radius. Let's increase it to 10. See, the shadows have become softer. And finally, there is this IES tab. And this tab contains different light profiles. And we're going to dive deeper into this during our bathroom video. And this would be the end of this video if it wasn't for this one more setting. It's called Include Extrude. And we can set up our light in a way so that it only illuminates one particular object, excluding all other objects, or vice versa. So we can exclude that one object from the light. Suppose we want this sofa to get extra light without illuminating other objects around it. So how do we do that? So we can create another light. We go to Corona Light and select a rectangle, and let's put it here. Now we can adjust its position in the top view and also turn on the targeted option. Then we click Select Light Target and point the light at the sofa. We need to reduce the brightness a bit. And now our sofa is illuminated, but so is the table, the floor, and so on. So this is how we can avoid that. We need to group the sofa and the cushions like this. Select these objects, I'll group them. I'm just going to call it sofa. And next we can either click this plus icon and add the sofa group, or we can select it from the list of objects. You can use any method you like, whichever one you find more convenient. Okay, now we've excluded the object, but we should have included it, let's say. So we'll go back to the settings window and we'll switch to include instead. See, now our light is only illuminating the sofa while ignoring all other objects. So we've just created a fake light. All right. Okay, that's it for today, folks. You'll have a chance to solidify your knowledge on Corona lights during practical lessons. Hi, let's talk about types of light in V-Ray. In this video, we're going to focus on V-Ray light. V-Ray lights are slightly different from those in Corona. In my latest video, we've covered V-Ray sun. And now we're going to see other V-Ray lights. All right, so we'll click Create, this plus icon, then Lights with the bulb icon, and then we'll select V-Ray. We have 4 types of lights here: V-Ray light, V-Ray ambient light, IES, and sun. In Corona, there are only 2 types, Corona light and Corona sun. V-Ray is slightly more functional, hence more light types. We're not going to use V-Ray ambient light. It's barely used in interior visualization. Well, some visualizers might be using it, but it doesn't make much difference. Then V-Ray IES refers to directional lights that are using IES profiles. We'll focus on V-Ray IS when talking about bathroom lighting. Today we're going to focus exclusively on V-Ray Light. So let's click V-Ray Light and we'll add it in the middle of the room somewhere. Like so. And then I'll switch to camera 1. So this is our light. Its default type is a plane. It's the same as in Corona. And we can change its size. Let's make it 100 by 100 centimeters. It's shining like a softbox. If you want to imitate softbox lighting or cornice lighting, and we'll talk about it later on, you should pick the plane type for all of your rectangle lights. To point the light in a certain direction, we can use rotate tool in viewport. Or we can use targeted option. Either way, we check targeted box, select light target, and point the light there. So let's point it onto the coffee table and the sofa for now. The next parameter is intensity. It's measured in default units, and it's now set to 30. If we want a brighter light, we can increase intensity to say 100. Also, we can switch from default units to lumens or watts. The choice is yours. I'm gonna stick with default units. Or you can use lumens, but in that case, intensity would be very high. Here's one important thing, by the way. In Corona, brightness is affected by the size of the light. So if we set the size to 10 by 10, the brightness measured in default units changes as well. So now let's go back to 100 by 100 and switch from default units to lumens. Intensity is currently at 14,000, and now let's resize our light again. Let's make it 10 by 10. And now, as you can see, the brightness has remained the same. So if you don't want the brightness to change when you're adjusting the size of your light, make sure to use lumens. If it doesn't matter to you, use default units. The next setting is mode color. So what you can do is you can pick a color manually. Let's go for a warm shade of orange. Or we can set the temperature in kelvins. Warm orange is somewhere between 2500 and 4000. Now let's go back to the default white color. We can also use a map from Material Editor, like bitmap for instance. And let's take this bitmap texture and link it to this slot. See? The texture has been projected onto the light. But anyway, you'll hardly need this for interior lighting. Let's move on. The next parameter is decay. You can set it up manually. It shows if the light source is illuminating the space right in front of it. This setting might be very useful when your light is sitting too close to an object. So suppose you have cornice lighting and you don't want it to shine too close to a certain object. In this case, you would need to turn on near on and enter its start and end values between 0 and 10. And once you're done, your light won't be illuminating the objects located up to 10 centimeters away from it. So next is directionality. Let's reduce the size of our light to 30 by 30. And also let's switch from default units to lumens and increase the brightness. We can uncheck this box, we don't need that. Also directionality in V-Ray works exactly like in Corona. And if we set it to 0.5, we get a directional beam of light shining straight forward. With directionality at 1, the light starts to shine like a laser, with its beams parallel to one another. And this value is barely used. Now, usually this value varies from 0 to 0.5. At 0.4, you achieve a softer light. If directionality is closer to 0, the light starts to shine in different directions and becomes very soft. This is how you can adjust and set up your beam of light. And we'll delve deeper into this when we'll talk about fake lights. And next we have this include/exclude option. So suppose we need to exclude this table from the light, and we find it on the list. It's the table group, so select it, add it here, and click OK. See, the table is no longer illuminated by the light, but now it's in the shade, which looks unrealistic. So how do we use this include/exclude parameter? Well, we mostly use this setting if, for example, we need to create some extra illumination for an object. So we create another light, we select include, add the object, and click OK. And as a result, our additional light is now illuminating just that one object. It's commonly used fake light. All right, moving on. The double-sided option. It's when the light is shining in different directions. With our current directionality value, our beam of light is shining forwards and backwards. If directionality was at 0, the light would be spreading out more evenly. We use this setting when we want our light to be shining in both directions. Let's turn it off by now. There's also an option called cast shadows. We can turn the shadows on or turn them off. We might need this setting when creating fake lights. Okay, now we have this invisible option. If our light is in the way, in front of the camera, for example, we can make it invisible. And I recommend turning it on at all times. The next option is occlude other lights. That helps when we have multiple lights in the scene. And let's try to recreate the scene. Create a copy of our V-Ray light, put it here, and see whether it's occluding the other light in our scene. But unfortunately here you can't tell. But if you turn on this option, your other lights may start generating shadows, and that's why it's best to turn it off. The next option is Effect Diffuse. All objects and surfaces in our scene have a diffuse clay material assigned to them. If we turn off Effect Diffuse, we'll turn it off as well. So when can we use this setting? When creating highlights and specular effects, we would need to create another light, turn off Effect Diffuse, and turn on Effect Specular. But if you spot some odd-looking highlights and specular effects in materials, go ahead and turn off Effect Specular. Alright, so finally, atmospheric effects. Now, we don't need this. Next comes shadow settings. We don't need this either. Here's also texture resolution. And that's pretty much it for V-Ray light. We can also change the shape and select dome shape, and we'll talk about it later. For now, let's pick a sphere. It works just the same as in Corona. It's a spherical light, like a bulb. Inside a lampshade, for example, let's turn off targeted and place our sphere inside a lamp. And let's create a copy and put it here. Make sure that your bulb have a realistic size, so let's set its radius to 3 centimeters. And next we'll switch to default units and increase the brightness. It's not very bright because it's covered on all sides. It's hardly giving out any light, but that doesn't matter. I'm just using it to show you how spherical lights work. We can also change its color, just like in Corona. Okay, now let's talk about dome lights. There is no such thing in Corona. Let's see how a dome light works. We'll be using it when setting up daylighting. So let's go ahead and see what that is. So we click Create, we go to V-Ray Light and select the dome shape. And let's put it in the center of the room. A dome light is basically the same as environment light. And you probably know that. When you're using white light as environment light in Corona, it's shining inside the interior. A dome light works the same way. It's a light located outside the interior. It's shining through the windows. This is the difference between V-Ray and Corona. In V-Ray, to set up natural light streaming through the windows, you need to create a dome light. It's a V-Ray light, just like any other. The only difference is that it has the shape of a dome. It also has the multiplier parameter. Let's set it to 10, and as you can see, the light is now streaming through the windows. Also, a dome light has the adaptive dome option. And let's see what that is. So as you can see now, our camera is inside the interior. Adaptive dome light knows that the camera is inside and redirects the light through existing apertures. Things like windows, in this case, inside the interior. So this is how it adapts to the camera position. See? The interior is already getting some light. In the upcoming lessons, we'll be using dome light to set up lighting. Otherwise, the scene would take much longer to render. So I recommend using a dome light. For exterior lighting, we'll be also using dome light, but this time with a map. Anyway, we'll focus on that during our practical lessons. For now, let's move on. Here we have a spherical dome light. That's when the light's coming from below and from above. And if we uncheck this box, we'll get a semi-sphere that only covers our scene from above. There's no light coming from below. The setting can slightly affect the lighting in our scene. Here we also have finite dome. And I'll be honest with you, I've never used this setting. The effect alpha option shows whether or not the dome light affects the alpha channel. Let's turn it off. Now our alpha channel is clean. Alpha channel is a transparency channel. And now everything outside looks like a mask. If we turn alpha channel on, our dome light will be affecting the alpha channel. So it's best to turn it off. Next, we check lock texture to icon. We might need this setting if we decide to add a texture to our dome light and rotate the light. By blocking the texture, we sort of make sure the texture is rotated with the dome light. As a texture, we might be using an HDRI map or sky map. Here you need to choose whether you'll be rotating your dome light or not. Okay, and I guess that's it for dome light settings. We might increase emit radius and target radius, but these settings are mostly irrelevant to our course. A dome light has the same parameters as any other V-Ray light. You can turn the shadows on and off or make the dome light visible. In that case, you'll have this black space outside the window. Or we can leave it visible. It's up to you. Effect diffuse, effect specular, and other options are the same as for the rest of V-Ray lights. And that's all I wanted to tell you about the dome light. We'll be coming back to it in our upcoming lessons.